Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. After organizing the project and its folders, importing the assets and introducing the level design via the tilemap node to create a base where our character can walk, in this video we will continue to talk about the level design, and especially we will talk about the parallax. I would first like to show you the changes I made to the folder structure of the Godot project. As you can see, I added something, but nothing special. I just organized all the assets for the level design in more detail. You can do that too if you want by copying from this screenshot. Well, now let's proceed with creating the background of the video game. In this video we will use the new PARALLAX2D node. We start by creating a 2D node as a child of map. We will need it to organize all the background in a more functional and orderly way. Remember to move the node that contains the parallax nodes above the other nodes, and to explain this it is good to give a brief introduction to rendering sorting. When creating software, normally, what is written next is read and executed next, and the same thing is true in video games and not only in lines of code. It is especially true in rendering. Of course there are methods to get around this, such as using the z-index value, but in this case it is good to make it more functional by using the correct hierarchy. What is inserted after is drawn after and thus overlaps what was there before. In this case the background should be displayed in the background and not in the foreground overlapping the floor. Then we add 2D parallax children. I renamed them as back, mid, and front, names that stand for the depth of the parallax elements, but you can call them whatever you want. For the moment we will focus only on the deepest parallax, leaving out the other two that we will see in a moment. To each parallax node we need to add at least one child node of type 2D sprite. To create a more interesting background we can add more than one. Via convenient drag and drop, we import the graphic resources to be used as background, each in its own 2D node. Now, obviously, the assets need to be fixed in the layer to create the desired effect, but first let's take a look at the rendering and try to fix the parallax properties. Let's proceed, move the 2D sprites nodes to the center of the viewport, and give them a momentary fix so we can better understand the effect the PARALLAX2D node will produce. Let's introduce the PARALLAX2D parameter called scroll scale. This is used to slow down or speed up the parallax movement relative to the active camera movement. Set it to a very low value to give the effect of something in the distance. I'm using a value of 0.2. Remember, it is very important that your parallax drawing covers the entire viewport, otherwise there will be gaps. Now, we will introduce two more very important variables of PARALLAX2D, repeat size, and repeat time. As the official guide reports, PARALLAX2D provides a bonus effect that gives textures the illusion of repeating infinitely. Repeat size tells the node to snap its position forward or back when the camera scrolls by the set value. This effect is achieved by adding a single repeat to all the child canvas items offset by the value. While the camera scrolls between the image and its repeat, it invisibly snaps back, giving the appearance of a looping image. While the repeat time would instead seem to add duplicates of its parallax content on both sides of the origin point respectively, equidistant from each other based on the repeat size. Said we can proceed with the level adjustment. In my case, I want to reduce the size of the elements, so that they appear even further away, after which, let's start fixing the background. And this is the final result. Beautiful, right? It gives the idea of a city in the distance that extends for miles. But it doesn't end there. We can enrich the level by making sure that the city is also close to the player, and extends both in depth and length, so we will create the other two PARALLAX2D nodes that I mentioned earlier. Now we will move on to the intermediate level. Repeat the same process as when you created the previous parallax background, so add 2D sprite type child nodes and load your texture resources onto them. In my case they are not clearly visible because I duplicated the previous parallax 3 times, so the drawings were also duplicated, but nothing alarming, just hide the rendering of the final parallax, and show it later when its turn comes. Now you can fix your level. Now it's good to resize the sprites, since they have more or less the same native size. If your drawings were created natively with different sizes, you probably won't need these resizing steps, but in case you have drawings with similar or even the same native size, remember to scale only the 2D sprite nodes. In my case I'll make them a bit bigger, but without exaggerating. After you finish fixing the level, do at least one test to evaluate the result. In this case, you have to go ahead and increase the scroll scale speed, because it is identical to that of the far background, and this is not good as it does not give a real depth effect. Very well, the game is beginning to take shape. Before proceeding with the closer elements, I want to add a much more distant background, to increase the depth effect and visual impact of the game. The step to follow is still the same: create a 2D parallax and add a 2D sprite node, and place it hierarchically before the other parallax nodes. Select a nice background image, and insert it into the child 2D sprite node. Place this parallax before all the others, since it will be drawn before all of them. Resize it to fit the viewport, and set the scroll scale property to 0. This background will have to remain stationary to give the desired effect. And this is the result. Well, it seems to be pretty good for now, but it's not over yet. We are still far from the end of our level design. Try different combinations. I considered 2 of the ones that seemed to me the most suitable, and as we can see, now it's just a design choice. Let's see what the second image looks like. To improve the graphic rendering, we can adapt the active camera so as not to let the lower part of the tile map enter the screen, and give a more artistic look to the viewport. Let's go to the camera settings and change the Y value of the offset, giving it a negative value. I used the value -256. To give a better depth effect, based on my background image, I divided the scroll scale by setting the X value to 0 and the Y value to 1. In your case it might not be necessary. The result is slightly improved. Now we can see a little better what is at the bottom of the background image. Now let's move on to the elements in proximity. If you have hidden the rendering of this PARALLAX2D, remember to click on the icon that shows it. Reset the texture resources to null or overwrite them directly. I'm personally setting the parallax values now, but you can do it after loading the texture assets. You will definitely need to set the scroll scale to a value of 1 or close to 1, and set the texture scale to a value close to 1 as well. Now let's move on to the graphic assets. I decided to start by inserting some street lamps, then I'll move on to the trees. I have several graphic assets for these, and I could use some of them for the medium background, so all that's left to do is view them on the screen and see which one is best suited to be in the foreground. Well, finally I decided my arrangement. I placed them on 3 parallaxes and grouped them inside 2D Node to order them better. Now I show you how I arranged them. These are the 2 streetlights I chose for the closest parallax. These I put in the intermediate parallax. And this one I used in the farthest parallax. Now it is time to observe the result. Well, the result looks acceptable. Now all that is missing is to set the parallax so that it repeats at an acceptable distance. So it should be fine. All that's left to do is to do a test. Oops. There's a small problem. The background parallax is not anchored to the viewport, and when we expand the window, the image stays at its size. Don't worry, it's easily fixed via project settings. If something like this happens to you, go to Project Settings, and look for Window. From there, edit Widen Mode and set it to Viewport. And if this problem also occurs, just go back to the previous menu, click on the aspect variable and set to expand. Now the whole viewport will adapt to the window size. This is not always a good thing, as the rendering may be distorted or with lower quality, so my advice is to use graphics assets natively created for the desired resolution. If you really need to make small adjustments, proceed with the steps I have shown now, but try to avoid the expand variable under aspect. Made some minor adjustments to the streetlights, and now we proceed with additional parallax layers that will be dedicated to the clouds and other objects that I would like to place in a hypothetical position between the player and the active camera. We proceed with the creation of 4 additional 2D parallax nodes. The procedure is the same: create the 2D parallaxes and then organize the nodes hierarchically. Now import your resources into sprite nodes. I am importing 2 cloud designs, a larger, darker one that I intend to put in the distance, and a smaller, lighter one that I will use for the remaining parallaxes. is the result. Obviously you can put less clouds or not put any. I decided to put a lot of them to give a different setting. Now I'll explain how I set the parallax nodes to give this effect. I placed a parallax node immediately after the level background and set the scroll scale to a very low value. I also set the auto scroll that gives an effect of autonomous movement to a low value. To give the effect of distance, I then changed the repeat size to a very high value so that I could get clouds of this type very spaced apart, and then I raised the repeat time so as to have more coverage. Then just repeat the process for all the other elements, taking care to set the settings appropriately to the depth effect that you need to give. As you can see, I increased the scroll scale values as the parallax nodes got closer to the camera. To change the transparency, go to Visibility, click on Modulate. Here you will see some sliders. The one needed for transparency is the one at the bottom. Change it as you like. To give the effect of something that is between the player and the camera, therefore closer to the view, I used a scroll scale greater than 1. You can play with these values in your parallax to find the best configuration. And in this case I also modified the auto scroll variable, giving it a higher value than the background elements. Now repeat this parallax node process to insert everything you want. This is a technique to create levels where the elements must repeat. It is not like creating a level in a static way, detail by detail. But we can combine different methods to create a game map, but it is not the purpose of this tutorial. Unfortunately, the scene could become complex to manage since all the nodes overlap. To avoid this, you could organize the level on a sheet and create a scheme, like the scheme on Draw.io that I showed you at the beginning of the video, and then create the nodes directly in a hierarchical way, or use the visibility icon next to the nodes, click and simply hide the nodes that you don't need. But remember that you have to make them visible again before running the game, otherwise they won't be rendered. This is the final result, but before concluding I want to explain a little thing that will be used later in the tutorials. I'm talking about scenes. Godot Engine allows you to save scenes and then reuse them when needed. This allows you to have a more modular and orderly project. Now all our level design will be saved as a scene. Go to your Godot home screen and right-click on the parent node of the whole level and click again on Save Branch as Scene. A menu will open, and if you followed all the steps in the previous video, you should find yourself with a folder called Scenes. You can use it to save your first scene. I created another folder inside it and called it Level Design, and inside it I saved the whole map. Now you will have the level loaded in the main scene, but to access it you will have to open it as an independent scene. This gives many advantages in terms of modularity, but sometimes in particular situations it is more convenient to keep some things all together in the main scene. Well guys, that's all for this video. I hope it was helpful. Share and leave a like to support the channel and my work, and if you have any questions or want to learn more about some topic, write in the comments, and follow the social pages to stay tuned with the latest news. Bye everyone, and see you next video.